Great. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome everyone for joining this webinar. My name is Dr. Amit Borse and I'm a Group Product Manager with IVA, a division of MCure Pharmaceutical. MCure is a pioneer in the field of gynecology and IVF. Programming 28 is a scientific research and is based on the concept of managing an ovarian cycle with GnRH analogs, gonadotropin, and hormones. Hence, our webinars are called Programming 28 webinars. Today, we have a very special webinar. As it is said, every scientific breakthrough is very special. So this is every first which matters. Today is a webinar first ever savior series through ART from none other than Dr. Manish Bankar, sir. May I now request Dr. Kalyani Shrimali? She would be a moderator for this session. She is a fertility consultant with Nova IVF Indore. Ma'am, may I request you to take the stage, please?
Okay, I hope you all can hear me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining in today in your OPD hours. We are highly obliged and we are very happy that you all could make it today. Like Mr. Dr. Amit said, that every first matters. And yes, every first matters in every field that is. Today, we take the great honor of welcoming Dr. Banker, sir, who has made the history in the reproductive medicine in India for being a part of the team or leading the team, may I say, for having the first baby that is known as the savior baby in cases of the thalassemia, where the baby was able to donate her bone marrow by the first matching of the HLA, and consequently the brother was saved through the multiple transfusions, and now he's free of this disease because of the bone marrow transplant. At the outset, Dr. Banker sir and myself, we would like to thank AmCure for allowing us to have this platform today to share this historic movement and for the wonderful case discussion with all our doctors around Pan India. So this is something which we are very happy about, and I am glad and I'm proud to be a team of Nova, in which we are able to do such amazing scientific work. Apart from giving the happiness to the patients, we are also enabling ourselves to explore the various scientific methods which are available in India as well as outside, and getting those same things in India as well. So today it's an honor for me to share the platform with Banker sir. He's always been an idol to me, and he will always have a special place in my heart because he has guided me through all my years in Nova and before Nova, for enabling us, each and every consultant, to come out with best of our qualities and to deliver the best of the success for our patients. So without wasting any time, I would like to introduce Dr. Banker sir. We all know Dr. Manish Bankar. He actually doesn't need any introduction. He's the medical director for Nova IVF Fertility, one of the largest IVF group in India. He has been selected for the prestigious Dr. V.C. Roy Award in 2017 by MCI. He is also the past president of ISAR from 2012 to 2014. He has been the chairman in Fertility Committee for FOXY. He has been the member of the draft committee of the ART Bill of India ICMR, and also been in the editorial board of the JOGI, that is of the Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences, and he's also the board member for Poseidon Group. So I welcome Dr. Banker sir today, and we will go ahead with the presentation, and later on we can take the question and answer session.
Thank you very much. Would like to thank MCure for hosting this webinar on this particular remarkable breakthrough. And I also would like to thank Kalyani for the kind introduction. So we'll have about 20-30 minutes of talk where I'll take you through exactly what we have done in this particular instance, and also other cases where similar technology can be used to benefit not only infertile couples, but many a times couples who are essentially fertile, but they need our assistance. So before we go into the details, let me start with what exactly is thalassemia. Now, thalassemia is a genetic blood disorder which occurs when there is a defect in the genes which are involved in the synthesis of hemoglobin. So what happens to for people who have thalassemia is that they're not able to make enough hemoglobin. And this leads to mild, moderate, or severe degree of anemia, depending on whether it is thalassemia minor or thalassemia major. And once they become anemic, if the hemoglobin levels are extremely low, they start suffering from consequences of severe anemia. Now, beta thalassemia occurs due to manifestations in the subunit beta of hemoglobin, or HBB. Now, because of HBB blockage, it leads to a decreased production of the beta chain, and the body's inability to construct new beta chain leads to the underproduction of hemoglobin A. It is essentially an inherited autosomally recessive disorder, which means that there are two copies for this in every individual, and one person can have either none, one, or both the copies. Now, this gene is typically located on chromosome 11. Let us see how this actually gets carried. So let us assume, first of all, if there is only one partner who is affected and the other partner is normal, then it is not a problem at all. Because at best, you would have a child who has thalassemia minor. The problem arises when both the parents are carriers and have thalassemia minor. Both will have one gene for thalassemia and one normal. Now, when they marry and they have a child, there are three options or three scenarios. One is that the child inherits the defective or the mutant gene from both the parents. And this would happen in 1/4 or 25% of the children, and that child will have thalassemia major. In another 50%, they would inherit one normal and one abnormal gene, and this 50% will exhibit symptoms of thalassemia minor, or they would be carriers. And the balance 25% will inherit the normal gene from both the parents and would be essentially thalassemia free. So this is how the disease gets transmitted from generation to generation. The only way to block the transmission of disease is to avoid babies who have thalassemia major. Having a thalassemia minor or a thalassemia free child is not a problem. So you just have to block this 25% transmission. Balance 75% of the children would be essentially normal or only carriers. Now, this is a fairly common condition, and it is present in up to 3% of the population in southern India and a much higher 3 to 15% in northern India. Within these regions, it is extremely common in certain communities like Sindhis or Punjabis in northern India, the Bhanushalis, Kachis and Lohanas in Gujarat, the Mahars, Kolis and Angris in Maharashtra, and the Gaudas and Lingayats in Karnataka. So apart from a regional basis, it is also more commoner in certain communities. Now, India is a very huge disease burden and has upwards of 100,000 patients with the beta thalassemia major condition. And in a year, typically 8,000 to 10,000 new births keep on happening every year. So the burden of disease is fairly high. Now, it is a very easy to diagnose this condition. What you need is a simple hemoglobin electrophoresis, and ideally this should be a part of not only preconception, but premarital counseling. And now there are quite a few programs where even school-going children are tested for this particular hemoglobinopathy. It need not be repeated again in life. If you do not have thalassemia, you will never have it in your lifetime. So this is a very simple test costing less than 1,000 rupees, and every person should be screened for this before marriage, and if not so, at least before they want to plan a pregnancy. Then the next question is, how do we prevent the condition? First and the foremost is that every patient or a person who has thalassemia minor should check the status of his or her partner. Because if, as I had mentioned earlier, if only one of the partner has thalassemia minor and the other person is normal, then the risk of developing thalassemia major does not happen. So if you have one partner who is thalassemia minor, you must check the status of the other part. If the patient comes during pregnancy and is at risk when both the parents have thalassemia minor, you should counsel them to undergo either a chorion villus sampling or an amniocentesis to find out whether the child is normal, carrier, or has thalassemia major. And if the child has thalassemia major, we can offer them the option of terminating the pregnancy. But if the patient comes in the preconception state, you have one more option, and that is to do IVF and test the embryos for the presence or absence of thalassemia major, and if the and only transfer embryos which do not have thalassemia major. So here we are completely avoiding the need for an abortion. We will only transfer embryos which are either disease free or have only the carrier status for thalassemia minor. If by chance, in spite of all this, you have a child who is born with thalassemia major, there are two treatment options available. One is a palliative. Because of the severe degree of anemia, you need to give them repeated blood transfusions. But we have another curative option, and that is bone marrow transplantation, carried out from a person who is HLA matched, either within the family or outside the family, and does not have thalassemia major. So this is the curative option. Now, for all this bone marrow transplantation, what we need is HLA matching. Now, what is this HLA? HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen. This is a gene encoding system, proteins which are responsible for the regulation of immunity. So HLA proteins are associated with defense against diseases and are one of the major reasons why an organ transplant or a bone marrow transplant would get rejected. Now, these HLA proteins are extremely diverse, and hence to have two individuals with the same HLA matching is not very common. The probability of finding such a match for an Indian patient in a multinational or an international HLA registry is around 16%. But if we look at all our Indian registries, this probability of matching is a very dismal 0.008% because our Indian registries are highly inefficient, and the current Indian registry has less than 35,000 people registered as compared to this international registry which has more than 22.5 million registered participants. So unfortunately, our Indian patients for an HLA match, if they want a match outside the family, have to look out for these international registries. Now, what does this savior sibling mean? The savior sibling means to have a child who is HLA matched to treat or to cure another child suffering from a particular disorder. What we do in this is create embryos or children with IVF using pre-implantation genetic testing to have a child which is unaffected or a carrier, and then use this particular child's bone marrow for transplanting into a previously affected child so that this unaffected sibling essentially becomes a savior for that particular affected child. And this can be used for many conditions. Now, let me take you through what we actually did for this particular couple. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Solanki both were carriers for thalassemia minor. They had two previous children. Their elder daughter, 7 years, was thalassemia free, and their second son, Abhijit, was suffering from thalassemia major. And Abhijit required frequent blood transfusions. In his life of 6 years, he had received 80 transfusions till they approached us. And because of this, they were advised bone marrow transplantation. The first option that they did was to check whether either of the parent, which only had thalassemia minor, or the daughter who was disease-free, whether they were matching or not. And unfortunately for them, none of the three would be HLA matched with the affected child. You can see that even within the family, neither the husband, nor meaning neither the father, nor the mother, nor the sister was HLA matched for that particular child. So then they tried to look for matched donors, both in the Indian registries and abroad. They could not find any match in any of the Indian registries. They eventually could find a match from an unrelated donor. This is called MUD because you are not taking this particular donation from the family. So it is matched unrelated donor in a bank in USA, but this turned out to be prohibitively expensive. With this kind of a background, they approached us to have a child who is both HLA matched and is normal on PGT-M and PGT-A testing, so that the child is healthy and would provide bone marrow transplantation for their earlier affected child. We performed 3 successive IVF cycles at our center in Ahmedabad to create a pool of embryos. And I will take you through this as to why do we need so many attempts to find this HLA match. And this is the history of the 3 cycles. In the first cycle, she produced 25 oocytes, 20 of which were matured and fertilized. And this led to the formation of 7 blastoses, which were biopsied and vitrified individually. The second cycle yielded 19 oocytes, 16 fertilized, and had got us 3 blastoses. And the third cycle, similar to the first, 26 oocytes, 24 mature, and this gave us 8 blastoses. So we had a total of 18 blastoses vitrified from these 3 particular attempts. What we then did was, we subjected these 18 embryos to PGT-M testing. What we have to do is take a few trophectoderm cells from each embryo and then vitrify them individually so that when the reports come in, we need to know as to which embryo to use for embryo transfer. Out of these 18 embryos which were subjected to PGT-M testing, only 2 were disease-free. So the disease-free rate was only 11%. 8 of the embryos were thalassemia minor. This means normal carrier, 44%. And the balance 8 had thalassemia major. So from this pool of 18 embryos, we were left with 10 embryos which did not have thalassemia major. They then underwent HLA matching. And what we found is that from the normal and the carrier, only 1 each was HLA matched for the particular affected child. So from the pool of 18 embryos, we were now down to 2 embryos which satisfied both HLA matching and being either disease-free or being thalassemia minor. We then subjected them to PGT aneuploid screening because we did not want this particular embryo to be affected by any other condition also. And out of these 2, we found that only 1 embryo was euploid, the other embryo carried a genetic abnormality. So from the 18 embryos, we were down to a single embryo which satisfied all the criteria. So from 18 embryos of 3 cycles, 10 were after PGT, either normal or a carrier. 5 of these were matched, but 3 of these were abnormal. 1 was PGTA normal with all the HLA matching. So 1, A5, euploid, HLA matched, disease. It was not a disease-free. This child is thalassemia minor, was available with us for embryo transfer. So this embryo number AS36 is the only embryo which is a match, is normal on euploid on the screening, and has only thalassemia minor. So this single embryo was then transferred after it was warm in a hormone replacement cycle. We prepared the endometrium with estradiol valerate 8 milligram, and once the endometrium was 9.9 millimeters, we added oral dydrogesterone and vaginal progesterone. This embryo implanted successfully, progressed till full term, and Mrs. Solanki delivered a healthy baby girl of 3.7 kilograms through elective cesarean section on 30th October 2018. Post-birth, the child was again tested to find out whether she was an HLA matched with the affected sibling, because what we had tested was on the embryo. We need to be sure that the child also was a match. So we took blood samples and it was found that the child was a perfect 10 by 10 HLA match for the sibling. Then came the issue of when to do the bone marrow transplantation. And we needed to wait for a period of 1.5 years because the child's weight need to be in the range of 10 to 12 kilos before we can attempt a bone marrow transplantation, because this child otherwise is too young to have the bone marrow transplant. The bone marrow transplant happened on 17th of March 2020. The Abhijit accepted this bone marrow, and since March 17, 2020, he is transfusion free. Otherwise, till then, he required a blood transfusion once every 20 days. And in this 7-month period, he has not required a single blood transfusion. Of course, he will require periodic monitoring for the rest of his life, but till now it has been accepted, and by all practical means, he would now remain disease-free. Now, it is important that this multidisciplinary care, even though it is the best curative for such children having thalassemia major, the challenge is that only 30% of such patients who approach find a suitable donor within the family, because there is a huge need of finding both a HLA match and a disease-free embryo. What these studies have shown that the high probability of finding this a match gives a more cost-effective and a novel treatment option, because this gives the couple the chance of not only having a savior sibling, but having another child who is both healthy and disease-free. Now, in addition to this, the same technique can also be offered for other conditions. We offer PGTM for evaluating an embryo which is at a risk of a particular genetic disorder when both the parents are carriers for a single autosomal recessive disorder. Typical example is thalassemia, that if both have carriers for this recessive gene, they will not exhibit the disease, but the disease will get manifested only in 25% of the offspring. It should also be offered when one partner is a carrier, has the recessive gene, the other partner is normal, but they have a child who has this particular recessive disorder. Or when one of the partners has a gene for an autosomal dominant disorder, or when one partner is a carrier for an X-linked disorder, and the typical example for this is hemophilia. And if we want to use this as a savior child as well, then we can combine this with HLA matching. So certain conditions for which it is offered is thalassemia, which is autosomally recessive, cystic fibrosis, also autosomally recessive, Huntington's disease, autosomally dominant, certain muscular dystrophies, commonest is Duchenne's, which is X-linked recessive, spinal muscular atrophies, or Tay-Sachs disorder. And the list is endless. There are a few hundred disorders for which you can offer PGTM testing. This process is fairly long, and let me take you through how this happens. So the first phase, which lasts for about 6 to 8 weeks, involves consultation and counseling. We need to find out exactly what is the mutation, and for this, we need to test both the parents, and if we have an affected child, that as well. So based on this, we need to develop a particular probe which will help us in identifying the genetic mutation in the embryo. This takes typically 6 to 8 weeks. Once the probe is developed, the couple need to undergo IVF cycles. The number of IVF cycles that you need depends on the ovarian reserve and the need for the embryo. We need to create blastocysts, do a biopsy, pull the blastocysts, and freeze them. We then have the process of doing the PGD, the PGS, and the HLA testing if required. This takes another 2 to 3 weeks. So the whole process till now takes something around 2.5 to 3 months. We then do the standard frozen thawed embryo transfer cycle and monitor the pregnancy. From the time the patient approaches you and has a healthy child, it would typically take a year and a half. How does this compare with a bone marrow transplant? As I mentioned earlier, for this particular couple, when they approached an international registry, the cost of having the bone marrow transplantation from a matched unrelated donor came to approximately 50 lakhs. In addition to this, there was a nearly 35 to 40% chance of graft rejection because this was an unmatched donor. As opposed to this, if we do the process of PGT-A, PGT-M with HLA, depending on the number of cycles they need to undergo, it would be around 4 to 5 lakhs. PGT-M and HLA testing probe development would cost somewhere around 3 to 4 lakhs, and the bone marrow transplantation about 8 to 10 lakhs. So the total cost coming to around 20 lakhs, which is significantly less than that of a matched unrelated donor. And secondly, the risk of rejection here is less than 20% because the HLA matching would be far more better because this is a sibling. In addition to this, let us see what would happen if we don't do this. Now, if we don't treat this person with thalassemia major and the child keeps on getting blood transfusion, the requirement of the transfusion keeps on increasing as the child grows from once every month at birth to about once every 7 to 10 days by the time they reach 20 years. Each transfusion carries with its own the risks of transfusion, and they also need chelation therapy because of iron overload. In addition, this child, because of the degree of anemia, is more prone to infection. Because of all this, the average lifespan of a person with thalassemia major is approximately 25 to 30 years, whereas after a successful bone marrow transplantation, this risk completely goes away. Because of this, the child is practically cured, and both the child and the parents can then live a completely normal life. Now, let us see how common this is and what is the literature on this. Now, this is a collaborative multi-center ASHRAE study published in Human Reproduction, which included 14 centers in Europe. They did this, they had 364 couples enrolled, out of which 60% were because of thalassemia major, 136 amongst these born, and out of this, only 57 of them have had successful bone marrow transplantation. The numbers are not very high. The critical point in this treatment, as I mentioned earlier, is the number of eggs that you need and the number of embryos that you need to create so that there is a possibility of having at least one normal matched embryo. And this is what this paper tells, that with PGT-M and HLA matching, the chances of identifying a matched unaffected embryo essentially depends on the mode of inheritance of that particular disorder. And if you have an autosomal recessive or an X-linked monogenic disorder, the chances of finding one matched embryo is around 18.8% only. Similar thing in this ASHRAE collaborative study, they found that the chances of finding a normal and a matched embryo was 11.6%. In our case, it was 1 out of 18, which is 5.5%, but this was only an isolated case. In addition, despite having this again study, which looks at concurrent aneuploid screening as well, it was found that only 25% of the embryos were unaffected and euploid after they have been subjected to PGT-M. So PGTM alone does not solve the problem because 75% of these disease-free embryos will have some or the other aneuploidy, and this adds one more complexity. So to summarize, IVF using PGTM, PGTA, and PGTA helps in producing a disease-free child, who then helps by giving bone marrow for the previously affected sibling. However, the probability of finding matched and euploid embryo is low, somewhere in the range of 10%, and hence we need a higher number of embryos, and we need to appropriately counsel these couples. We also need to spread the awareness that this medical condition can be not only treated, but can also be cured. Let me take you through our experience with PGTM. We have had 29 patients who have consulted us for PGTM. 15 of these have undergone PGTM cycles till now. 9 of these were for thalassemia. 5 of these have been for creating a savior sibling. One, the case that we have published, has had a live birth. 2 of the others have HLA matched euploid embryos frozen with us, and they are awaiting embryo transfer. In one patient, we could not find a single match, and in one, we are awaiting the results of the embryo transfer. 5 patients we have had for non-savior siblings, out of which we have had 3 live births of normal, unaffected children. In addition, so these are the 5 patients for savior siblings. You can see the number of cycles that they have had. 4 of them have had 3 cycles, 1 has had 4, 18, 14, 16, 26 embryos, 11 embryos. And you can see that in one, which we have had a live birth, second has had only one HLA match, which was an abnormal on PGTM. They only have a carrier child now, so they will have a disease-free child, but not a savior. The second patient, third case, has 2 HLA matched, 1 PGT normal, awaiting an embryo transfer. The fourth patient with 26 embryos, all HLA matched, but all of them have thalassemia major. So in spite of having 26 embryos, this patient did not have one embryo which was suitable for transfer, and we are awaiting results in the 5th case. We have also done PGTM for other categories, 2 for hemophilia, 1 for disc keratosis congenita, 1 for a short rib dysplasia, 1 for oculomotor ataxia, 1 for spinalomuscular atrophy, and 1 for gangliosidosis. We are in the process of doing this workup for oculocutaneous albinism, for Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, ectodermal dysplasia, and for cystic fibrosis. So there are many conditions where you can offer PGTM for at least creating a disease-free child. With this, I would thank you all. Again, I thank Abbott for Emcure for inviting us for this particular webinar, and we will now open the floor for question answer. Thank you very much.
So thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. And it is very heartening to see that so many cases has been done till now, which have helped so many couples achieve, disease-free baby, as well as in simultaneously along with that, helping the other sibling also achieve the same. So, sir, we open the platform for the questions. So the first question is by Dr. Paresh. He has asked that, are there any chances that in spite of having HLA matching in the embryo, it turns out to be not matching after the birth?
Theoretically, it is a possibility, but having a completely unmatched child after birth is very unlikely. It could happen that instead of a 10 by 10 perfect match, the child could turn out to be a 9 by 10 or an 8 by 10 match. This would mean that we could still carry out a bone marrow transplantation, but the chances of rejection would be marginally higher.
Right. Okay. So, so coming to this, when this program was started for Abhijit's savior baby, what were the challenges that we had to, because this is the first case, so I'm sure that even you had to come up with a solid plan for it and understand that what all is going to happen, how to decide, how to manage, and how the rest of the team was involved in it. So, what were the challenges that you faced during planning of this program, sir?
So, as you rightly mentioned, this is a multidisciplinary challenge because we need an IVF lab where the embryos are to be created. We need a genetic testing center which has the capability of doing PGT-M, PGT-A as well as HLA. And for this, we use the iGenomics lab based out of Delhi. And then we need a, a physician who will carry out the bone marrow transplantation. Subsequent to this, we needed to review the literature because we did not know as to how many embryos we should create. Should we stop at one attempt or should we start creating more embryos? Because sometimes the cost of testing the embryos is much less if we test a larger number of embryos together. And we then decided to have at least upwards of 15 embryos so that the probability of finding one embryo increases. Then it is a matter of perseverance and patience because the patient needs to be counseled. The patient has to be aware that even after all these efforts, we may not be able to find an embryo. And then it was a question of real intense waiting because we started getting reports stage by stage and embryos started getting eliminated. And we were so happy in the end that at least we got one embryo. And then came the challenge of having a single embryo to be transferred and hoping that that embryo would implant and give rise to a live birth. But since the embryo is also PGT-A matched, the probability of a pregnancy was higher. This is basically an NP percentage game because at every stage, there is a possibility that something wrong could happen. So very apprehensive, a period of 1 year, and then after birth, the child should turn out to be a perfect 10 by 10 match.
Correct. So it's been a lot of hard work that has been put in and a lot of planning that has gone into planning of this program. But eventually, yes, all that ends well is always good for us. So coming to the other questions, sir, like you mentioned that the lab should have the PGT-M facility, the PGT-A. So sometimes we all get confused about, how are we going to decide which patient is for what? So if you could just elaborate a little, what different type of PGS do we have available with us in the lab?
So the older terminology was PGS, which was for pre-implantation genetic screening, and PGD, which was for pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Now everything has been clubbed together in one. It is called pre-implantation genetic testing. Now this is required for three separate conditions. One is called PGT-A, where we are doing it for aneuploid screening. What we screen in this is whether the embryo has the normal 23 chromosomes or not. So this is similar to a karyotype. We only see whether the embryo has 23 chromosomes, whether there is any monosomy or trisomy. So this is typically for patients of advanced maternal age, for repeated IVF failures, or couples who have had a previous child with Down syndrome. So this will only tell us whether there is a karyotype abnormality, whether the embryo is euploid or whether the embryo is aneuploid. The second is PGT-SR, where we are looking for any structural rearrangement. And this is required when the parents have some balanced translocations, and this is typically in patients having recurrent miscarriages. Now, translocations are very small breakages. If you subject this embryo to PGT-A as standard aneuploid screening, you will not be able to detect this structural rearrangement because we need to do specifically look for those specific structural rearrangement. So PGT-SR is the second test required for patients who have smaller translocations or deletions in their karyotype when we do a focused analysis for that particular aspect. The third is PGT-M, where we are looking for a monogenic disorder like thalassemia or hemophilia or this muscular dystrophy. So it is a pinpoint analysis for a condition that we already are looking for, and we have to develop a probe for that particular condition. So if we want to screen for thalassemia, we need to find out the mutation of thalassemia and develop a probe which will only diagnose thalassemia. If that embryo has any other disorder, we will miss it. So ideal thing is to do PGTM for that particular disorder and do a simultaneous aneuploid screening so that the child does not have any other aneuploidy, and then select the embryo.
Correct, sir. So sometimes, sir, when we get such patients, they have conceived also with babies, and then we advise them that they should undergo a chordocentesis or an amniocentesis to check on the karyotype. So how do we make it a point that there's an awareness between the gynecologist, or let's say between the genetic counselors as well, that such possibility of planning of the IVF with PGS is a better option than rather than patient becoming pregnant with it and then doing the amniocentesis and then aborting it if the baby is not well. So is there any program, or is there any let's say any plan of coming up with such things so that we can make more people aware about it?
I think this is a very important point. The first step is to spread the awareness that every person should be screened for thalassemia. And I think a lot of school programs have been initiated where they are screened both for this as well as the rubella status. Second is a part of premarital or preconception counseling, where again, individual partners should be screened for thalassemia. Then the issue comes is whether you allow the child to conceive normally and test the pregnancy by chorion villus sampling or amniocentesis. There, if we find an affected child, the pregnancy needs to be terminated, or we undergo IVF, do a pre-implantation genetic testing, and only transfer a normal embryo so that the abortion does not happen. And this is an issue which needs to be counseled because the cost of both the procedures is different. And from my experience, patients who are aware of this or patients who have had to have previous abortions because of an affected child are more easily acceptable for undergoing IVF with PGTM.
Right. Very true, sir. Okay. So, was there any legal issues, or was there any filing of the forms or anything that we needed for such procedures?
Yes, so this would form under the PCPNDT Act. We have to fill up all the forms that are required that we do for a chorion villus sampling or for an amniocentesis. So that is the Form F and Form G. We need to do exactly what we would have done for a chorion villus sampling or an amniocentesis.
Right, sir. So now that before we planned this program, I'm sure, sir, we went through so many literatures and everything. So there's a little bit of question arising for if there is any long-term or any psychological effects that happen in the savior baby.
Again, it depends on what we are going to do. If you are creating a savior sibling who has to, let's say, donate an organ, or has to undergo repetitive procedures, then it is a big issue. But if it is a one-time procedure of a bone marrow transplantation, that would not create any other psychological or even medical issues with the child. So this is a fairly straightforward and a simple one-time procedure without any long-term sequelae.
Right. So because we normally do a lot of PGS routinely in the Nova Center, so we do have the patients coming when we advise them for the PGS that their first question is that is it going to damage the embryo when we are going to take the biopsy out of it? So even the lot of doctors even ask us that is it going to hurt the baby when we are going to, or is it going to damage the formation of the baby when we are doing this PGS?
So I think what has changed in the last 3-4 years is moving completely from a day 3 biopsy to a day 5 biopsy. Before 3 years, what was being done is out of a day 3 8-cell embryo, 2 cells were removed. So this was almost 25% of the embryo which was removed. And herein the risk of embryo damage was higher. Now all PGT biopsies are at the blastocyst stage. So we only remove 6 to 8 cells from the trophectoderm from the hundreds of cells in the embryo. So the percentage of cells removed is very low. Secondly, these cells are removed from the trophectoderm, the part which leads to the development of the placenta, and not from the inner cell mass from which the fetus develops. So the risk of damage to the fetus is not there.
Okay. The question for the HLA type is, how accurate is PGT? Yani, should we be counseling all the patients for PGT to increase our success rate, or should we be limiting it to only certain patients who have got history of repeated failures or let's say repeated miscarriages?
So currently, from all evidence, it should only be restricted for patients in whom it is indicated. The reason behind this is that in a young, good prognosis patients, the percentage of normal embryos is going to be high. Secondly, there is also the issue of mosaicism. So mosaicism means that some cell lines in a person are different. So sometimes it happens that you have an embryo which has a mosaicism, that means some abnormal cell lines and some normal cell lines. And this adds to the confusion. Thirdly, there is also the issue that doing a PGTA will not convert an abnormal embryo into a normal embryo. We only know whether the embryo that we are transferring is normal, and if it is normal, we should be transferring the embryo first. So what PGTA essentially does is it shortens the time to a pregnancy. So today it is offered especially for couples who are of advanced maternal age, patients who have repeated IVF failures, previous multiple pregnancy losses, patients who have had a previously affected children. So these are the patients or couples in whom it is offered. But this does not mean that you cannot offer it to another couple also. It will help us in reducing the time to pregnancy.
Correct, sir. Okay. So the one more question, which for all the IVF specialists who practices the PGT or who plans to start doing the PGT or PGD for the patient, is there any particular protocol or any particular drugs or any particular this thing that you will suggest us to increase the chances of having better and more quantities of the embryos, more numbers of the embryos?
I think as far as creating the embryos, it is standard protocol. The only difference is that since we will not be carrying out a fresh embryo transfer, we do not want to expose these patients to the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So it should always be an antagonist protocol with an agonist trigger, so that there is no risk of the procedure. But you can use any standard antagonist protocol that you would like, trigger with the agonist, and create good blastocysts, biopsy them, and freeze them. So the only requirement is a good lab where you will be able to generate good number of blastocysts.
Right, sir. And so coming to like in the first case, we saw that we had to get almost 18 embryos to have that one matching HLA embryo. So what is when we are doing the counseling, because counseling is the most important part when we will be dealing with such patients. So normally how many embryos should we be advising them that, this is the minimum set of embryos that we will need to start with this program?
If you look at all literature, the chances of having one embryo which matches and satisfies all the criteria is roughly around 10 or 11%. Keeping this in mind, around 15 embryos is what one should aim for.
Around 15 embryos. Okay. So when we start our counseling, we should be able to inform our patient that this is probably what they will need, how many number of cycles, probably depending on the first cycle, how many they are able to generate the embryos.
Especially if you are also looking at HLMHE. If it is only PGTM, then maybe around 10 or 8 to 10 embryos is fine. But if you are also looking at HLA matching, then we need at least 15 embryos.
Okay. So I think so. Thank you so much for answering all the questions that we had got till now. Is there anything else that you would like to let the people or let the gynecologists know about that, how we should be planning, or what are the other technologies that we are expecting that should be available in the next few years?
I think the one change which might happen in the next year is the non-invasive PGT. One of the questions which you asked was the concerns related to embryo biopsy. People are working at a non-invasive PGT similar to the NIPT, which is offered in place of an invasive test. that the culture media, droplets of culture media are taken, and the chromosomes which are expressed in the culture media are being tested. Currently, the concordance rate is only around 90%, but I'm sure this will improve with time. And once we have this, the whole issue of embryo biopsy will ultimately go away. This will make it much more safer.
Right, sir. Okay, thank you so much, sir, for answering all the questions. And I think we have cleared a lot of doubts regarding the PGT as well as the PGD also. And of course, this is a huge achievement and a huge milestone that has been there in the Indian reproductive history. Congratulations one more, sir, one more time to you, sir, and the entire team. And I am super proud to be a member of the NOVA team, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And I will invite Mr. Rajiv to close down the session today.
Yes, madam. Thank you very much, madam. Just on behalf of MCure, I would like to thank Dr. Manish Bankar, sir, for agreeing and having this webinar. And we are really privileged and honored, sir, to have you on this board. And you are a legendary personality, and you have revolutionized the whole IVF industry, created a huge name with the NOVA, and we are really privileged. And first of all, let me congratulate on behalf of MCure for a historic and legendary achievement of first ever savior sibling through ART, sir. Congratulations wholeheartedly from the team of MCure. And we are very committed to spread science in pandemic. We have done more than 120 webinars, and we look forward to have more in future, sir, with you. And we wish you very safe and healthy life. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
a pleasure. Thank you.
I think we should all applaud for Dr. Banker for this achievement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
So with everybody's permission, I'll now close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.